mics turned on. Okay, so I know that we're a little behind on time, but I think that it would be beneficial to start out with, Zara, maybe if you tell us a little bit about just like the motivation behind making the film, and then a little bit about the production and your crew, and like why you decided to make it, just because we just watched a good portion of it, and so I think it would be beneficial to kind of hear your voice and your story a little bit.
Yeah, for sure, and I'll make it a bit faster because I know we are running behind on time. We were eager to get home. But the reason we started with this issue is because I spent my first year of university living in Florence, and I had a good friend in the south of France, right near Menton, and I'd make the journey quite often between train stations. And every time I went, I'd be pulled off the train, and they'd search my bags and look at my passport, while my white friend that I was accompanied with would never get stopped. And that drew my immediate attention to what's happening at this border and why is this happening to me at other borders. And then once we did some research about what was going on and why there was such a huge increase in police presence, we decided that this was an issue worth focusing on, to highlight, what police brutality is happening here, what human rights violations are going on, and really, creating attention as much as we can as students to create information that other organizations could use to create change at this border. So the crew was myself, the director Nico, and another producer Fraser, and it was 3 of us for about 3 months on the French-Italian border, just with a couple of cameras. We were lucky enough to win the Davis Projects for Peace grant, which is $10,000 to fund a project for undergrads. So we started with that, and then turned to Indiegogo and different other crowdsourcing to create more revenue for the film. So we started 2 years ago when we were all in our first year of university. And now it's almost done. There's some places you can see the boom and the microphone in, and there's some silences that we're waiting to have some music over. But besides that, it's almost done. So.
Yeah, I think that's a great introduction, and it's good to see the motivation behind the film, and particularly of picking that specific border, as you said, the fact that it comes from personal experiences. And I think it is such an important movie because even as a student of migration studies, that's not necessarily a border that comes up a lot. So it's such an important film to do and highlight the issues that are going on at that border. Could you talk a bit about the precautions that yourself and the crew took while working with vulnerable populations? I know I myself was quite interested, particularly on how you guys filmed the train journeys. I was kind of thinking, oh God, will the police see a phone or a camera?
Yeah.
Will that kind of affect things? Could you speak a bit, about those precautions?
Yeah, we did definitely intense research on everything that we could to do, how do you work with vulnerable populations without taking advantage of them? How do you tell a story when it's not yours? And so the first week that we spent there was without cameras, talking to people about their experience, if they'd be comfortable filming. And almost every train scene, we didn't want to get people in trouble with the cameras, but after talking with a lawyer that worked at Caritas, which is a charity that works on the border, they said that maybe having a camera there might help to create some accountability. And they said within the legal structures there, we are allowed to film because it's public domain and we're not capturing the faces of most of the cops themselves. So we definitely nervous being on the train with the police because they definitely were not the most friendly of people. There's this scene where you can see them like fear-mongering. There are 2 police are just like, one is doing push-ups and the other is just kicking them on the gut to show strength or whatever that was. But we definitely, talked to the population before getting on the train saying, is this okay? Would you want it? And other people were more enthusiastic to have it because that presence might be helpful to get them across. All of the people that we filmed going across on the train, it was not their first attempt, it was their 7th or 8th. So kind of trying different ways to cross the border.
Are there any, opening up the discussion to the room, more about Zara's experience filming or the film itself, if there are any questions, and also keeping in mind to tie this back to the broader themes that we've talked about throughout the day of racialized borders and the experience of migrants in the EU. So if there are any other thoughts or comments, questions?
Thank you so much for this film. It was really brilliant. I admire the courage and the initiative. Really beautiful film. So thank you for showing it to us. I was wondering whether your impression of the place as such was today somebody, I think it was Hope, who used the word legal fiction of non-entry. Are we living, or is the place living in a legal fiction of rights? Is it just the people who are coming to Europe who are being stopped, searched, beaten, and then put into some confinement? You said it happened to you. Did you speak to people who live locally and have all the papers and have been there? Is it happening to everyone? Is this reduction of rights, or this, are we turning into a legal fiction?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. I think the answer is, quite honestly, if you're white and have documentation, you're not facing any problems. For those who were, even had the documentation and were not, white presenting, they were being stopped on the train. When I went, for a holiday, because you're right next to Monaco, you're right next to the south of France, Nice, the most beautiful and most wealthy places you can imagine. A lot of my friends who were of color going across that border, despite being Americans, Canadians, they were being stopped. Or even locals, when we talked to local residents, they thought, many of them living in that area who had been there for years, those who were white thought that it was good that people were being stopped and checked to kind of get this migrant issue under control. But those who were of color and lived there for a while thought that in the past couple of years, since the closure of the Red Cross camp and the other frameworks that were meant to support migrants, that had forced more migrants onto the street, that led to a heightened increase in their presence, had said that they found living there very much more difficult than in previous years. So I think, to answer your question, yes, I think that there's this almost imaginary land that exists there for some, and for others it's almost a hellscape. You see people of color, specifically migrants, being treated as if they were animals living amongst rats and boars and snakes and everything else you could imagine. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you for showing this documentary. It is, of course, is a very emblematic case study, but also political case in Italy, right? Because this has been going on since 2015. This suspension of Schengen, first on the basis of immigration and then on the basis of terrorism in France. And just to say that recently there has been a quite positive news. From a legal point of view, because the French Conseil d'Etat adopted the decision of the EU Court of Justice regarding, that established that these pushback are illegal. And so I think it's something to remark that at the moment the situation has changed. Also on at the Alpine border, so for the first time since 2015, in February, they stopped pushback. They stopped giving these refus d'entrée, and it's quite interesting how, it's very difficult to understand how the French police is readapting border control practices, because it seems that they are pushing back only those people who have an alert in the Schengen information system, so who receive an order of expulsion order from Italy. And however, they started to take fingerprints, while before only Italians took fingerprints. So I think that, just to say, a small positive note, that this is a legal battle that, thanks to French and also Italian lawyers, as provisionally has been successful then, who knows, in a few months, and that started in 2018.
It was a question I was going to ask, and then you also just raised it, because I think there was a comment in the film about that laws no longer apply. I think it's also relevant to your question, and so I actually wonder whether the decision, because for example in Belgium, there's been lots of legislation, but also court decisions stopping pushbacks and forced returns, but then it still happens there is basically the police, law enforcement still goes ahead and does the same. So I'm wondering whether in this case, yes, there is a decision by the courts, but also in your experience and speaking, I'm sure, from people and lawyers and others, whether the enforcement of the laws are actually in practice, or whether there's any form of accountability when these laws are not enforced. So like, are people who are pushed back have access to lawyers? Can they challenge this? You know, stuff like that.
Yeah. I think it's a good point. Something to kind of mention is the first part of the film was filmed in 2022, and the second part of the film, which we didn't get to, is filmed in the summer of 2023. And you know, again, the legal landscape is constantly changing, so things have been happening that have been both positive and negative. But specifically, you can see with minors, they're supposed to have a legal right, to cross the border. They're supposed to have, you know, help seeking authorities to help their journey across. And even though that's been a rule for a very long time, they're still not getting help, or even you can see the falsifying documents. You know, legal officers are writing incorrect birthdays and dates. So even though that there are protective laws and rules and regulations to help these individuals, they're not always being enforced. However, I think, you know, over the past couple months, that's definitely changing, and hopefully for the better. So, but in terms of legal help, there's very little legal help you can find. There's a couple of lawyers that do pro bono work at Caritas, the organization on the border, and they help people as much as they can while they're waiting for their asylum documents, and you know, to push back against border regulation. But there's so little lawyers, and there's 30,000 people that pass through this border every year. Or last I saw on the statistics, there's not enough help to go around, and also how many cases are the same? How many people are going through the exact same thing, and how many times will courts actually pay attention to what's going on and actually care about one life of a migrant from a country they don't care about? So I think, yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but
Take two more questions.
Hiya, thank you for the film, and I actually lived in Menton last year because I was doing an exchange in the Sciences Menton campus, and that's where I got to know Fraser in the film. And my question is, I actually have two questions. So firstly, I think you mentioned a lot about, you know, the police brutality and all that violence and all that, you know, the kind of administration problems. And what do you think is behind all that? What do you think is behind all the police violence? And because like, what is making the police so powerful that they can, you know, decide the whole fate of migrants? And my second question was that in Sciences Po, there was an activist called Cédric Erouge, I think, and I think he's from Nice, and he's, you know, famous for having welcomed a lot of migrants in his house and for like feeding them and stuff. I was wondering if you know, included activism or like, you know, people, public figures like that in your film, because we didn't get to see the whole film. Yeah, thank you.
no, both really good questions. I think, of course, there's a million factors that contribute to what make the police so powerful, and I think colonial legacies is one of the factors that we kind of talked about today. There's this really powerful line in the film where I find powerful, that is, we are the law, like in response to someone saying, I have legal rights to do this. No, we determine the law, we are the power. And I think something that's given the police a lot of power recently is since the Red Cross closure, the amount of migrants who have been on the street have increased, just their presence, their perceived presence. And that has led to France and Italy employing more police officers to tackle this so-called threat. And I think as their threat becomes more perceived, and as they, you know, the numbers increase, so-called, you see this response being legitimized by government officials saying, yes, we need more people to talk about. And I think their power comes in numbers, and their power comes in reputation, and it comes from other migrants and mobile bodies in that space telling others about their accounts, about how powerful they are and the violence that they can inspire, which inspires fear, which makes, you know, I guess fear of a name only intensifies the power of one itself. So I think that's my answer to that question. However, there are many other factors that make police a powerful force. We have a couple of public figures in the movie, including some locals as well as student activists from Sciences Po Menton. So some faces you might recognize. And again, local residents like Filippo, who is driving people to and from the border, as well as some of the more prominent migrant activists who are migrants themselves, who are kind of famous on TikTok and Instagram. So can't remember the name that you said specifically. We didn't include him in the documentary, which we probably should have since he went to Menton, Sciences Po. But yeah, I can send you a link to the movie if you'd like to watch the rest. So.
Thank you. Yeah, actually, well, thank you so much for sharing the documentary. And part of my question was also related to what was in the second part of the film that we haven't seen, and if it was focused on the humanitarian actors as well. So yeah, that was mainly my question. But I also just had a comment about the movie and something we haven't touched as much upon today, which I think is also interesting and powerfully shown in the movie. And myself, I also grew up at this border, and I used to work at the Red Cross camp at the border, and the motivation behind closing it was blamed on COVID. And in a lot of the images we see kind of this weaponization of health as a motive for some of these bordering practices. And so I think that some of the images really show that, and that was a theme we haven't spoken as much about today, but that is, I think, also very much part of these discussions. So yeah, that was my question, but thank you for sharing.
Yeah. For the second half of the film, just to address the first part of your question, we follow Ismail specifically, who left Cameroon at the age of 15, who's now 16, and we kind of watch him attempt to get into France, which he eventually does do. And we later learn that his brother that he thought was lost at sea and who died actually survived. And we kind of follow the migrants in their second part of those who are able to cross and those who are stopped at the borders, and kind of what are the effects on mental health, how do they experience their new life of knowing that they'll have to stay on the other side of the border. And we also follow Ismail and a couple of the other boys in their new life in France, and how despite making it to where they needed to go, they still face discrimination and loneliness and kind of othering from European society. And then I think health plays a really big part in this, post-COVID film, about how so many of the resources that were available for migrants, I'm sure that you're aware of them as you worked at the Red Cross camp, then became unavailable for migrants, and that left this huge deficit of resources. Many were forced to rely on the local river, which wasn't actually that safe for them, to bathe and use water. A lot of the water resources that they had access to in the town occasionally were turned off, and they weren't able to get access to fresh water. Food and medical health, again, reduced in this post-COVID time with the excuse of saying, oh, COVID is happening, or we're coming out of COVID. We don't need to supply them with resources because there are those who are more in need. So I think I would have loved to touch on health more during today, too.
Okay, well, I guess we'll wrap up there. There's going to be a reception afterwards, but Ava might have a few closing remarks to make, but thank you, Zara, for showing us your film.
Thank you so much for the session. Thank you for the film. Thank you, the two of you, for running it, for preparing. I actually lost my notes that told me what to do, but I have a list of people that I need to thank for helping today. So first of all, our speakers of the day who came prepared and delivered what they delivered. I agree, lots of topics have not been covered, but we have to meet again, right? So Emmanuel, Janine, Martina, Tarsis, Hope, Ashad, Tom, Elena. Magda did not make it in the end. Nadine, myself, thank you, myself, yes, Patrick, and Zara, right? So we also have people who have helped us chair the panels throughout the day, Nina, Jennifer, and also Lauren and Georgia, who did all they could to make the day a success. We also have people working behind the spotlight, right, to feed us through the day, to make everything work so we could meet and discuss. So this was Carl Ludwig, this was Laura, Simon, Charlotte, doing absolutely everything around it. So she single-handedly carried the event for us today, and even fixed the wine for Polly, Carolina, and Delphine, right? So thank you everyone who participated, and thank you audience here in the room and also online if there is still somebody out there for joining us today. So wine is waiting.